Hi, everybody. Welcome into the Bulls Talk podcast. I am Kevin Anderson. You can call me Bulldog. Most people do. I'm joined by our insider for the Chicago Bulls at NBC Sports Chicago and NBCSportsChicago.com, the great K.C. Johnson. K.C., as promised, we had so many great questions from our mailbag edition of the show. We're going to do a bonus edition of the mailbag for the podcast today. So we're going to dive in. Let's start with a player that's been in the news a little bit lately. This is from Rick Leslie at Ricky Bull 12. If Zach and Vooch aren't traded, will Donovan be brave enough to hold their starter minutes down to 24 per game so Smith and Io get to play their game? So that's obviously a very specific question about Zach and Vooch and their minutes. And I think we'll get to that in a little bit, but just your reaction to that and just where we are with Zach LaVine on the Bulls.
Yeah, so I mean, at this point, we're taping this August 5th. You've got to prepare for the fact that Vooch and Zach are going to be on the roster. I mean, management kind of started laying that groundwork with their session with us out in Vegas, saying, we expect Zach to be on the team. We're excited because Zach's healthy. They're obviously laying the ground. Now, as I always say, it takes one phone call to change things, right? So there's a lot of time between now and training camp. But at this point, you have to work under the expectation they're going to be back. And look, man, they actually had a dry run on this when both Vooch and Zach were injured at the same time last year. And they both came back, and they both came back coming off the bench to control their minutes limit. Now, I think that will be a drastic measure in the sense that I don't see both of those guys coming off the bench to start the season if they are on the roster to start the season. But the point is, Billy Donovan's got his hands full with this roster and this rotation because it's clear management is going for a youth movement. It's clear they're building for the future post-Zach and post-Vooch, given the fact they're trying to trade both. And it's clear if they're both on the roster that they're good enough players to start and get a lot of minutes. So that's going to be quite the balancing act by Billy Donovan. I assume it was a subject that Billy brought up when he went to visit Zach in L.A. shortly after Summer League. It's very standard procedure for Billy to go around the world, not just the country, the world, and visit his players in the offseason. He's done it every offseason as Bulls coach. Typically gets a couple international trips out of it, with Vooch playing for Montenegro and the national team or wherever Vooch is. And Lowry Markkinen used to be obviously on the roster. So Billy travels a lot of miles, and he's a relationships guy. And, obviously given what's going on with Zach, the stakes of that meeting were higher this offseason. But as we've said all along, Zach is a professional. I was told it was a very cordial professional meeting, and we'll see if Zach is still here come training camp.
Who pays for dinner when they go out? Who's picking up the tab in that situation?
I'm going to speculate that Billy's got a corporate credit card.
so Michael does. Michael Ryan's.
I will speculate that Billy's got an all expenses paid credit card. That will be my guess.
He's got a black card. He just throws down there and pays for it. I love it. I think for me, answering Rick's question specifically, I don't see a healthy Vooch or Zach getting just 24 minutes a game.
I agree.
I think, you could certainly, bring up what KC just did about the blueprint for maybe how you do it when they're coming off an injury and minutes are specifically limited by the training staff and agreed with the player. But I think with the healthy roster and healthy Zach and healthy Vooch, I think both players are starting. And I think Zach certainly is north of 30 for his minutes. Maybe Vooch is hovering right around there. There certainly is a log jam in the backcourt for minutes and guys you want to develop. But there's really not in the front court, especially at the center position. So I think just by the nature of how thin the roster is up front, I don't think you can really play Vooch just 24 minutes or less in a typical game. But certainly as we get in training camp, we'll get some answers for that and how Billy wants to approach it this season. And certainly as we get a couple weeks into the season, I think we'll have an answer for what the rotations are really going to look like. But Billy's always been fluid with how he approaches the rotations. What we see opening nights, not necessarily what we're going to see a month later in November. So thank you for Rick for that question. KC, another question specific about Zach. This is more of like a philosophical approach from Jeff Stein. How exactly do you tank and at the same time up Zach's value? Is that even possible? And so this really dives into the how do you increase Zach's trade value during the season?
Well, I'll just say this. I mean, management's been very clear that they're not using the tank word. I mean, they're just. I mean, they have kind of accepted our. Not that like they have to sign off on it, but like they have kind of nodded when we've brought up youth movement. But as far as tanking, I mean, they've made it clear they're targeting experienced youth. So it's not like, all in on bad players and expiring contracts and guys who haven't played. I mean, Josh Giddey's. Like I said many times, he started 80 games for number one team in the West. That's an experienced young player. He's played 3 years in the league. Jalen Smith, albeit in a backup role, although he has started some, has 4 years in the league and is, experienced young player. Now, Modest Bazelis obviously is raw because he fell to them as a draft pick. So they are not tanking. I think their approach, I know their approach because they said it to us in Vegas. Their approach is play the young guys, develop the next roster iteration, and win the number of games you win. And if keeping the top 10 pick that is owed to San Antonio is a byproduct that falls in their lap, okay. If it isn't, okay, then they're probably in the playing picture. They're focused on getting the young players better, and all the other stuff, falls into line. So, as far as Zach plays into that, that kind of ties into the first answer. Like, how much of a role does he play while you're also trying to rehab his trade value, keep him somewhat engaged and happy, but also develop the young guys? It's going to be messy. I just don't see any way that this is not going to be messy, mostly because Giddey needs the ball in his hands. Kobe White needs a lot of catch and shoot opportunities. Patrick Williams needs to cook now that DeMar DeRozan's off the roster. It's like, how is the Zach LaVine usage going to fit into this? And this is not a statement or indictment on Zach. This is just, to me, it's a messy roster build, and I think there's going to be a lot of bumps along the way. I really do.
So for me, certainly I think it would be a mistake to term what this team is doing as a tank. And let's be honest, they cannot out-tank the Wizards. They cannot out-tank the Hornets in the East. Just not. And you probably can't out-tank the Pistons, though they certainly have a lot of young talent, and I think they may surprise some people this season with how competitive they are in their play. But outside of that, this is certainly a youth movement. I think Eversley's gone on record, about what he thinks this team can do. But in my mind, 25 wins is probably the floor. 35 wins is probably the ceiling for this team. We'll kind of get into, there's another question about that a little bit later, which we'll kind of dive more into. But specific to Zach, I think number one, in terms of upping his value, he's got to show he can be healthy and stay healthy. That obviously was an issue last season. I think that was one of the concerns that teams had when possibly trading stay healthy on the floor. So if the Bulls can accomplish that with Zach, I think that'll certainly help any situation that he wants to get to or get out of, or whatever you want to term it. Casey, you bring up a good point, and this is something I've been kind of like kicking around. Certainly when we look back at the DeRozan and LaVine era together, it didn't work. Certainly added Vooch there, and the three of them, they well chronicled their lack of playoff success. We don't need to dive into that too much, but specific to DeRozan and LaVine, one of the reasons I think they didn't really work that well together when they were without Lonzo, which was certainly the linchpin for that stretch of time in which he was healthy, was they both kind of need the ball a little bit to succeed. And so when you take out DeRozan off this roster and you add in Giddey, now it's obviously not a straight swap there, but in terms of the minutes and what we're going to see in the rotation, that's likely going to be it. Giddey needs the ball, in my mind, even more than DeRozan did on this roster to be effective. Now, Giddey's a fantastic playmaker, and that's not necessarily a bad thing if the ball is in his hand. Great passer, great facilitator, and I think he will improve the offense by the nature of him kind of taking over maybe that Lonzo role that we saw a few years ago. But the big question that you just brought up is how, not only from a shots point of view, but I'm talking purely from a ball movement, offense, who's got the ball in their hands, usage rate point of view. A lot of ball handling time needs to go to Giddey. Zach's going to want it to. Kobe's going to need it. P. Will hopefully can kind of thrive in that role off ball, but I would love to see LaVine play more off ball. I would love it. And this is something we've talked about for years on this podcast and observing this team. He is one of the best catch and shoot players in the league. That is Zach. I'm not necessarily saying that he needs to play exactly how Klay Thompson did in Golden State, where he only dribbles the ball 6 times in a game. However, I think more off-ball action, plays specific for Zach in that vein would go a long way to not only getting Zach shots, getting him points, but being overall healthy for the offense itself.
So you're spot on. And 3 quick things before we get to the next question. So I'm looking at usage rate. So Zach's usage rate with the Bulls, just taking out his Minnesota years, in 7 seasons with the Bulls, his usage percentage is 29.5. Career low. No, Bulls low, 23.8 last season in that injury-plagued short season, where he was off the ball quite a bit. And if you remember, he was running to the corner a lot. Giddey usage percentage in 3 seasons with the Thunder, 23.4%, with a high his second season at 24.6. It dipped a little bit last year, obviously, because of Shea. So, yeah, you're spot on with that. The other thing I'd like to say is, like, I'm probably less in the camp that there's this theory that Zach needs to rehabilitate his trade value. The league knows who Zach LaVine is. He's been in the league 10 seasons. He had a 3-season run where he was a 2-time All-Star, Olympic gold medalist, and one of the most efficient scorers in the league. He had a bad start to last season. The entire Bulls team did. Zach was the poster child for that bad start. He wasn't healthy. He's now healthy. To me, what needs to happen is Zach needs to prove that he is who he was before the injury and have more time tick off his contract and have a team go, that's the guy we need to put us over the top. I think that the reason why Zach hasn't been moved, there's multiple reasons, but I think a big one is the new collective bargaining agreement. I think if the new collective bargaining agreement hadn't come into play, you've seen contracts far worse than Zach's get moved in this league. And, you know, there's this image of Zach, just because of how poorly he played to start last season, that he needs to rehabilitate his value. He was coming off of a 3-season heater there where he was one of the elite scorers in terms of efficiency in the league. And like I said, oh, by the way, 2-time All-Star and Olympic gold medalist in that time span. So Zach just needs to be healthy and be who he is, but I completely agree that needs to happen off the ball. And I can strongly tell you that in conversations I've had that is the plan, because Josh Giddey needs the ball in his hand. Billy Donovan's never been a huge fan of Zach's decision-making. And so we'll see how it plays out, but that is the plan going into the season.
So in your mind, he doesn't have to have a 50, 40, 90, north of 25 point per game season to get traded.
No, he needs to, more time needs to go off that contract, because that's a huge contract to add in this day and age with second apron concerns. And he needs to be who, he doesn't need to be like, 50, 40, 90 would be career year. He doesn't have to need a career year. He just needs to regain his all-star form. By the way, thanks for bringing up the 50, 40, 90 numbers, because remember, that was one of my preseason predictions to last season, that Zach would be in the 50.
I didn't want to go there. Are you going to make that prediction again this season?
No, I am not.
Okay. So thank you for Jeff for that question. All right, this is a question from Tom Notcher. This is a semantics question, and we can certainly dive into what is reality and what we should call these things. Tom asks, Why is it so hard to admit that the Bulls are in a rebuild? I get that AK can't say it. He's an executive, may get in trouble with Adam Silver. But the facts don't lie. AK is slowly putting together a core group with an average age of 22. That's a full rebuild. And that's from Tom. Thank you, Tom, for that question.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. It's like they're not going to come out and say we're tanking or, we want to keep that top 10 pick. I mean, we asked specifically about the top 10 pick, and I detailed what their kind of approach was at before. If it falls into their laps because they haven't won enough games, but they've developed the young players, then that's a bonus byproduct. But that's not their, that's not their publicly stated goal. I mean, ticket prices are high. They need to sell those seats. They're starting a new television network. Can we say that on this podcast?
Sure. Yeah. The reality is fact.
Yeah, it's a fact. So yeah, I mean, they're a lot, but yeah, it's clear. The way I've been phrasing it is youth movement. You can call it. They touched on this in Vegas. Management did that. It's the next roster iteration. The other roster iteration had a 3-season shelf life, and that shelf life is over. So this is the next roster iteration that they're attempting, and we'll see where it goes.
I think you can call it a rebuild, and I wouldn't disagree with you if you wanted to. I think certainly when it comes to that phrase, it's a little bit loaded, and I think maybe management's reason for staying away from that rebuild has nothing to do with Adam Silver, but probably has more to do with the general fan and what they perceive a rebuild to be. I think most people, when they hear the word rebuild, they're in for some really bad seasons. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're not for this Bulls team upcoming, but I think they probably hope to be a little bit more competitive than how most people would term a rebuild. To me, in this modern NBA, a rebuild, certainly is what the Pistons have gone through. It's what the Hornets and Wizards have gone through. It's what the Jazz are probably about to go through if they trade Marketing. So, I would say it's totally fine to call it a rebuild. I think it's a little bit probably more accurate to say a youth movement. Now, if they trade Zach before training camp and what you get in return is more youth or draft picks, then yeah, I'd say full on rebuild at that point. But I think it's honestly just semantics when what we call this. Like this team is not going to be contending for the Eastern Conference top of the East this season. They're not going to be contending for the NBA Finals. If they contend for a play-in spot, I think they'll be happy, even though that's probably a outside looking in situation with where we expect this roster to be this season. But yeah, call it a rebuild. Call it what you want. That's it's totally fine. I think as a fan, anybody who wants to call it a rebuild, I would not disagree with you. So thank you, Tom, for that one. Hugh Jones asks, how competitive is this team going to be? Record-wise, they're probably not a playoff or even a play-in team, but how do they or can they create a winning and competitive culture? What is the key for this team to get good winning basketball again with a viable identity? Matt Jones asked that one. It's a really good question. There's a lot to kind of pick apart there. So this is kind of a 3-part question, KC. Let's start with how competitive this team going to be, and give us a record prediction of where you see this team as we are in early August.
I mean, it's so hard because you don't know what the final roster will look like. I mean, is there a Hail Mary Zach trade out there?
Probably not.
Yeah. So assuming he's in the roster, I mean, really a lot of it depends on how he performs and how he meshes with what they're trying to do kind of post Zach. I mean, there is a scenario in which he comes in and regains his efficiency scoring wise, and Giddey's running up and down the court and things like that, and things are better than we think. I will say the one definitive that we can say is I think this team's going to be pretty defensively challenged.
Yes, accurate.
Trading Caruso is just really the start of it. Anyway, so I think that. But so if you're asking me to predict wins, I don't. Well, I don't. What's Vegas at? I haven't looked at Vegas.
Oh, I think they are around 32.5, I believe.
I'd probably go 30, 31, 32. That's where my mind was going right now. So
Yeah.
How about you?
I would go 32-50 as of right now. I think the defense thing, we've talked about it a little bit on this podcast. We will certainly talk about it more. And I think as we get eyeballs on what this rotation looks like, but the expected starting lineup with Vooch and P. Will up front, and then Giddey, Zach, Kobe, mix and match your wings in your backcourt there. That's a very bad defensive lineup. And so if those are the players getting the bulk of your minutes, then you're going to be giving up a lot of points. Like, so I fully expect them to be bottom 5 in the league defensively.
Oh, wow.
This
I don't know
season.
if I go that far, but
Yeah, 20, 25 plus, 26 plus in terms of defensive efficiency this season. Given those players getting those minutes, I think it's going to be really rough. And certainly they were not a good defensive team last season, right? Were they 20? Where did they finish? 22nd overall.
that sounds right. I didn't have that memorized, but
And
yeah,
so you lose Caruso. That's like that to me is worth like 4 spots in the defensive efficiency. By the way, our producer Tony Gill is not able to be on the podcast right now and messaged us. It says FanDuel has the Bulls at 27.5 wins. Has the
lower
over
than you said.
under. That's lower. Yeah, I thought it was 32.5. So 27.5 is, gosh.
That's bad.
Yeah, that's bad. That's bad. I see them.
There are a lot of bad teams in the East, so that I'm going to go back to 30. I was at 30, and then you talked me up to maybe 32 because the over under and Vegas always knows everything. So I'm going to take the over. I'm going hard 30 and 52.
And honestly, a big motivation for me, kind of pointing 32 as their kind of like milestone where they may hit it is because of the Eastern Conference.
Yeah,
like if they were in the West, under 27. Pound the under there, but they're not. They're going to be playing some other bad teams who, again, are better at tanking than the Bulls will be this season. Like even get into it, like Brooklyn, I think is going to be a very bad team this upcoming season. So, yeah, that's our win total. Again, defensive is the biggest issue. So, moving on to the other part of Matt's question is, how can they create a winning or competitive culture? What is the key for this team to get good winning basketball again with a viable identity?
Well, the other part is kind of general and esoteric, but I can talk about identity. I can guarantee you, Billy Donovan's been wanting to play faster and up and down the court for years, and you just can't do that with DeRozan. And that's not a knock on DeMar. I mean, he's probably going to be a Hall of Famer one day. But you're going to see this team play a lot faster. Trust me on that one. With Giddey, Kobe, Io, Patrick Williams, there's no other way to play. And look, if Zach's bought in and engaged, and I mean, he can play in transition. Obviously, now he's slowed his game down some and become more of kind of a catch and shoot guy. But you know, it's only a few seasons removed from him catching those lobs from Lonzo Ball in transition, and Giddey knows how to throw an alley-oop too. So I can guarantee you that's going to be a big part of their identity, is trying to get up and down the court faster. Now, it's hard to play in transition when you're taking the ball to the net, so that's going to impact things as well. So that's going to be the goal offensively for sure, an identity.
In your mind, is that the key to getting winning basketball back at the United Center?
Well, trading for Anthony Edwards might be another way. I mean, they're a long way from winning basketball. They just don't have the roster. So, I don't see winning basketball in the next in the short-term future. They just don't. They don't have the roster for
it. For me, I agree with you. I think in terms of like style and competitive culture, I think a lot of it has to do with the system we're going to see, specifically offensively, from the Bulls this season. I think it's going to be very different than what we've seen the past 3 years on this team. I would say the blueprint for how we hope they'll be able to play this season is probably the Pacers, a team that plays at a very high pace with a lot of ball movement. and is not a very good defensive team. I think if they can take that and kind of like emulate what Indiana has done and have Giddey play that Halliburton role, then I think that's going to be like your first start to like creating an identity with this team. We just talked about the challenges that are going to be faced defensively with the expected starting lineup and with the players out there getting the majority of the minutes. But on the flip side, that group should be able to score a lot of points. And if they can play at a high pace, that will go a long way to getting teams not see the great part about playing at a high pace. It's not just about like taking a shot within like 5 seconds of the shot clock and just like going back and just trying to get up as many shots as you can. That's not necessarily what playing at a high pace really means. And the goal of that is playing at a high pace means not only getting out in transition as quick as you can, but at the same time that allows or prevents rather defenses from getting set. And if you can have quick ball movement within the style of the pace, you can generally get some good looks if you have guys who are willing to cut to the hoop more often. When you have somebody who's got a great playmaking mind and ability like Giddey, you should be able to get points that way and more points at the rim. Certainly, there are 3-point issues, which we've discussed at length last season, is still going to be an issue in my mind because, Giddey's not a very good 3-point shooter. Zach certainly is. Patrick Williams certainly is. Vooch, as we know, really struggled last year from that. Kobe's continuing to improve. So maybe they'll be a little bit better from the 3-point side of things. But I think, number one, it's about playing in a up-tempo style of basketball. If we can see that, I think that's what their identity will be, at least offensively. And in terms of creating a winning culture, certainly it's going to come with the style of play, but I think it also comes with a team and a player roster that's not going to be content with losing. And then this is something that I've brought up a lot about, like people who are on for a full-on tank and want to be motivating. You cannot flip a switch like it's a light switch to go from we're done tanking to now we're going to be competitive. That is not how it works. The Wizards have been trying to tank and get out of the tank for years now. The Pistons obviously truly tanked, but are still stuck in the tank. And so, that can have a very bad effect on players who are in that program and on that team for an extended period of time. And so you don't want players who are okay with losing. And that's why I think you talked about like the previous question about from Tom admitting they're in a rebuild. No player wants to hear that the front office is going, okay, we're going to tank this season, or we're in a full on rebuild. No, like they want to win games. They want to contribute. They want to win. Ideally have some fun doing it and making individual contributions and points, rebounds, assists, whatever it might be for them, playing good defense. But for me, identity wise, it's going to start from like what we're going to see offensively. And K.C, I think you're 100% right. I think what this ideal system Billy Donovan runs, he wasn't able to do with DeRozan. Now you make up for that because DeRozan brings so much other things to the floor that you go, okay, we're not going to play at a very high pace because we're going to take advantage of DeRozan's skill set. But with DeRozan off this roster now and his love for the mid-range game and playing more of a half-court offense, it should allow them to be much more up-tempo. So for Matt asking the question, thank you for that. But to me, a competitive winning basketball and viable identity is going to start with them playing a style of basketball that Billy Donovan wants to run, which is up-tempo, and we'll see where we go from there. But to your point, KC, about giving up a lot of baskets, it's hard to be consistently up-tempo when you have to take the ball 94 feet every time.
Exactly. Yeah.
So thank you, Matt, for that one. All right, Hector Garcia. This is kind of a thought-provoking question. This is a two-parter. Part 2 is just for me. Who, if anyone, on the current Bulls roster will be on the team the next time the Bulls are in the NBA Finals? That's you know what? Did we ask that question before?
That one. Yeah,
we answered that one before. I forgot to check it off. So you
He
know,
just wanted to say Hector's name again, and he had probably a Star Wars question or something.
he did. He says, was Darth Maul underutilized?
Yeah,
Yes, of course he was.
See, that's the only reason why you're bringing it up for another episode. We answered that one.
Yeah, so I forgot to check that one off. So thank you, Hector, for that one. And the answer to the first part, as we mentioned before, check out our previous editions of this mailbag podcast. So that's the end of our bonus questions for the Bulls mailbag. So thank you, everybody. We really appreciate when you reach out, and there's a lot of really, really good ones. We had to do kind of 3 episodes with that one. Moving on, KC, I know you are a huge fan of the Olympics, just everything that goes into it, not just Team USA and men's and women's basketball in the Olympics, but really every sport, and it's incredible. I'll start with a specific question to Team USA. They are clearly having a great Olympics so far. I had some concerns heading into the Olympics about how they were playing, but they haven't had some great starts. My main concern with Team USA right now is they haven't played great first quarters. They've had some matches in which they just don't seem to come out with the right intensity they need to. But then they flip a switch when it gets down to it, and they've won a lot of games very easily. So far, they are the favorites heading into the medal round. What has to happen for them to not win gold? What has to go wrong for them to be silver within this tournament?
They've had some turnover issues. So maybe a game where, they just can't take care of the ball and another team gets hot from 3. I do think there's going to be some really good games. Obviously, Canada's playing well.
Yeah.
Germany's playing well. So I think there'll be some tough games, but I don't see them losing the way they're playing. And they're just so deep. And the big story that I've enjoyed is just all the hand-wringing over, Tatum, DNP, CD, Embiid, DNP, CD. I mean, come on, man. It's like, I loved Brian Windhorst from ESPN wrote a story about how Michael Jordan was the only player to start all 6 games for the 1992 Dream Team. I mean, it just, to me, all it speaks to is a different media era. Can you imagine the game where Magic Johnson didn't start or Larry Bird didn't start? Now, they were older, or more pertinent, a 26-year-old Scottie Pippen didn't start, a 26-year-old David Robinson didn't start. Can you imagine if Twitter existed then and, 24/7 talk shows? And I mean, it's like, of course somebody's going to be left out. You've got 12 all-stars on the team. I mean, and I think Steve is so perfectly suited to handle this scrutiny and this outside noise. His personality is so unflappable, and, he always kind of has a self-deprecating take on things. So look, they're deep. And the fact that the reason I bring that up is I was talking about their depth. I mean, when you've got a situation where Tatum doesn't play or Embiid doesn't play, that kind of speaks to how deep this team is. So I don't see them losing, but if they were to lose, it would to me be a game where they're just, throwing the ball all over the place and the other team gets hot from 3.
Who is a Canada that you would see as their biggest competition left?
Well, Germany is playing very well.
So Germany in the quarterfinals. It's Germany and Greece, France and Canada, Serbia and Australia, and Brazil and the U.S. are the quarterfinal matchups.
Yeah. So, U.S., Brazil. Yeah. France has not played that great. Serbia, you can never count them out just because they got the best player in the world. But
I know.
I think France, I think Canada and Germany are probably their biggest competition. But like I said, I don't see them losing. They're just too deep. They're playing too well. They're too body. I mean, LeBron's playing at an incredibly high level. Anthony Edwards obviously got hot last game. So yeah, I think they win gold.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think for me, their biggest competition is probably Canada and Serbia. Certainly the last time they played Serbia won the Jokic minutes, but then when Jokic needed a break, USA rolled over that, and I expect that to continue. So unless Jokic is ready to play a without a single break, without a minute of rest, I think USA beats them, and certainly Canada's got a lot of really good talent on that team, which is certainly it's kind of speaks to the movement of basketball that the country's had in the last decade plus. But I don't see them not winning gold. They're just too talented, too deep all around. Finally, KC, just in general, the Olympics. What is it you love? You've covered two Olympics. What is it about the actual Olympics themselves? Is it this, in your words, why do you love it? I guess is the best way to ask that.
Yeah, what's great is when I was fortunate to cover Beijing and London for the Chicago Tribune, and I did not cover men's basketball at either event. Now, I did a feature story at both. In 2008, I wrote about the great Andres Nocioni, and in 2012, I did some stuff on Doug Collins, and who was there broadcasting, and Anthony Davis. So I was around men's basketball a little bit, but I didn't cover it as a beat. I actually covered women's basketball as a beat at both Olympics, and man, that program is ridiculous. It is so good and so deep, and it's amazing that Taurasi's like still playing. I mean, because I covered her 12 years ago in London. I might have covered it in Beijing. I have to look up that roster. It's too long ago for me.
I think this is her 5th Olympics, if I remember
she's
correctly.
Ridiculous. Anyway, I just love the energy to them, and I've always loved the Olympics growing up. I like kind of under the radar sports. So I love swimming. I love cycling. I love everything. I love the Winter Olympics. I just love the Olympics. I love the energy to them. I love the national pride that comes out in athletes. I mean, Simone Biles is insane. There's always
Incredible.
one athlete that just takes your breath away, and she is it for me this Olympics. So yeah, it's just, there's just nothing like it in terms of covering it, in terms of energy. You just are working all the time. There's camaraderie. There's vibrancy. There's everything. It's really fantastic.
For me, it's everything you said, and I love the stories that come out of the Olympics. Like seeing, especially countries that I think we kind of take it for granted a little bit in the United States. We're always going to finish near the top of the medal count. We have dozens, if not hundreds, of athletes in both the Winter and Summer Olympics competing, but there are a lot of countries who only have one athlete participating or a couple athletes participating, and then rarely get a athlete to even medal. And so like when that happens, and just the source of pride that the people in those countries have for their hometown and home country athlete to get on the medal stand, whether or not it's gold, silver, bronze, it doesn't matter, to get on the medal stand, to be top 3 in a specific sport in a 4-year time span is incredible. So like to see the camaraderie, enthusiasm that comes out of it, it's just special. Like the national stage and the global stage for this, and certainly not just as basketball fans. This gives us more basketball during the summer that an otherwise period in which we would not have basketball. It's always a good thing. August and the first bulk of September, generally for us as NBA observers, is it's catch up on some reading and catch up on some Netflix and things like that. But like for me, like just it's everything about it. And then I've worked 2 Olympics for NBC, Pyeongchang and Tokyo. I was in South Korea for a month during that Olympics. Just it's incredible to see the host countries come out and kind of like put their best face on, and just knowing that they are on the global spotlight for that. So I love everything about it. So certainly it's get to the specific this year's Olympics. It seems like it's been a pretty big success, and we've got some incredible stories. Specific Simone Biles has been just amazing to watch. I love watching, and this is not just specific to sports, but I love watching people that are at their peak of their craft perform.
Leo Marchand. I mean, that's just breathtaking to do it in your home country, and the swimming, and to win that many Olympic golds swimming has just been incredible. So
yeah, Yeah, which is I think why like Michael Phelps became such a global icon, because not only did he do something that had never been done before and probably never will be again, but one of my greatest watching sports memories is watching Phelps go for those 8 gold. I can remember being at Finley Dunn's on the north side for one of those relay races, and you don't see it too often at a bar, which they literally would turn off the music and turn up the house PA system, but they did for Phelps's races, right? And so I remember just the relay that he won, one of the relays that he won, just everybody losing their minds over him winning gold. And so that's kind of like, you see that when it's the Bears are in the playoffs, or the Cubs or White Sox or Bulls are in the playoffs, you'll do that. But that atmosphere was like times 10 on that night. So yeah, Olympics are fantastic. I hope everybody's enjoying them. And if you're not, that's okay too. Hopefully you're watching some USA basketball. If you're listening to this podcast, hopefully you're a basketball fan, and Team USA is going to go for gold over the next week or so. K.C, give me your behind the scenes summer plans. Do you read a lot during this downtime of the NBA calendar?
I read a lot, regardless of if I have downtime or not. I'm a reader, so yeah, I read a lot. But no, this is a time where it definitely slows down. So get on the lake a little bit more. I'm a big kayaker, and got a kid going off to college for the first time, so spending some time with him down the stretch here. So yeah,
I know you love music, but you don't strike me as a Lala kind of guy.
Not a Lala guy. I've only been a Lala when Radiohead's been there. So
yeah,
I'm not a Lala guy. Pitchfork or Riot Fest, sign me up. But Lala,
it's too much.
Yeah.
Everything's cranked up to 11.
Well, it's not about the music. It's about the scene, and I'm about the music. So, and I'm also old. I can't do the scene anymore. I'm old. So,
and you're not paying the VIP behind the scenes stuff.
Correct. I got to finance an education here, man. Let's go.
So, thank you everybody who contributed to the podcast questions, the extra mailbag questions that we did. We always appreciate that. So, this has been the Bulls Talk podcast on NBC Sports Chicago. For K.C. Johnson, you can check out his work on Twitter/X at KCJHoop. Certainly check out his stories at NBC Sports Chicago and NBCSportsChicago.com. If there are any Zach LaVine developments, he will be all over it. So put his notifications on for that on Twitter, and anything he tweets will go instantly notification. KC, I'm Kevin, and for Tony Gill behind the scenes, thank you everybody. We appreciate when you watch, listen, comment, subscribe, give us 5 stars if you feel like it. If you don't like us, that's okay too. Give us 4 stars. So thank you everybody. Have a great week, and go Bulls.
All right, now that's over. I want to tell you the 3 keys to being a real Chicago sports fan. It takes guts, sacrifice, and downloading the NBC Sports Chicago app. When there's highlights, you can pounce on them. When there's exclusive insights, you listen and take notes. And you won't get blindsided with the push alerts. So download it